Sarah Martinez had been working as a civilian communications analyst at Fort Henderson for 3 years. The military base was her second home, and she knew every corridor, every security checkpoint, and every face that belonged there. At 28, she was one of the youngest analysts in her department, but her sharp mind and dedication had earned her respect among both civilian staff and military personnel. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Sarah arrived at the base at 06:30 hours, her security badge swinging from the lanyard around her neck. She waved to the guards at the main gate, who knew her by name, and made her way to Building C, where the communications center was located. The autumn air was crisp, and the base was already bustling with activity as soldiers conducted their morning routines. Sarah's job involved monitoring and analyzing communications intercepts from various global sources. She worked closely with intelligence officers, translating coded messages and identifying potential security threats. It was sensitive work that required the highest level of security clearance, something she had earned through years of impeccable service and background checks that went back to her childhood. That particular morning, Sarah was assigned to work on a special project. Her supervisor, Colonel Williams, had briefed her the previous evening about intercepted communications that suggested unusual military movements in a hostile region. The messages were encrypted, but Sarah had a gift for pattern recognition that made her invaluable to the team. As she settled into her workstation, Sarah noticed something unusual in the latest batch of intercepted communications. There were frequency patterns she had never seen before, and the timing of the transmission seemed to follow a specific sequence. She began documenting her findings, cross-referencing them with previous intelligence reports. Around mid-morning, Sarah made a discovery that sent chills down her spine. Hidden within what appeared to be routine military communications were coded references to Fort Henderson itself. Someone was gathering intelligence about her own base, and the information was detailed enough to suggest an inside source. Sarah immediately flagged her findings and requested a meeting with Colonel Williams. However, when she tried to reach him, she was told he was in an emergency briefing with the base commander. The urgency and the voice of his aide made Sarah realize that something significant was happening. Unable to wait, Sarah decided to document everything she had discovered. She printed copies of the intercepted communications, highlighted the suspicious patterns, and prepared a comprehensive report. Her training had taught her that time was often critical in intelligence work, and she sensed that what she had uncovered could not wait for formal channels. As Sarah worked on her report, she became aware of increased activity throughout the building. Military personnel were moving with more urgency than usual, and she could hear hushed conversations in the hallways. Something was definitely happening, but the nature of the emergency remained unclear. Lieutenant Thompson, one of the intelligence officers Sarah worked with regularly, stopped by her workstation around noon. His usually friendly demeanor seemed strained, and he glanced around nervously before speaking to her. "Sarah, I need to ask you something important," he said in a low voice. "Have you noticed anything unusual in the communications you've been monitoring? Anything that doesn't fit the normal patterns?" Sarah's heart raced. Lieutenant Thompson's question confirmed her suspicions that her discovery was part of something much larger. She quickly showed him her findings, watching as his expression grew increasingly serious. "This is exactly what we were afraid of," he muttered, studying her analysis. "Sarah, I need you to make copies of everything and bring them to Conference Room B in 15 minutes. General Morrison and General Stevens are conducting a special briefing, and they need to see this immediately." The mention of 2 generals sent a wave of anxiety through Sarah. General Morrison was the base commander, a stern but fair man who commanded respect throughout Fort Henderson. General Stevens was visiting from the Pentagon, and his presence suggested that whatever was happening had national security implications. Sarah quickly gathered her documents, made the requested copies, and secured her workstation. As she walked through the corridors toward Conference Room B, she noticed that security had been quietly increased. More guards were posted at key locations, and she observed that all non-essential personnel were being directed away from certain areas of the base. Conference Room B was located in the most secure section of Building C. Sarah had only been there once before, during her initial security briefing when she first started working at the base. The room was designed for classified discussions, with signal blocking technology that prevented any electronic surveillance. When Sarah arrived at the conference room, she was surprised to find several high-ranking officers already assembled. General Morrison stood at the head of a large table covered with maps and documents. General Stevens was studying satellite imagery on a large screen, while several colonels and intelligence officers reviewed various reports. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and Sarah could sense the weight of whatever crisis they were dealing with. Lieutenant Thompson gestured for her to approach the table, and she nervously clutched her folder of documents. "Generals, this is Sarah Martinez, the analyst I mentioned," Lieutenant Thompson announced. "She's the one who discovered the communications intercepts we discussed." General Morrison looked up from his documents and fixed Sarah with a penetrating stare. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. His reputation for being thorough and demanding excellence was well known throughout the base. "Ms. Martinez," General Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Lieutenant Thompson tells me you've uncovered something significant in your analysis. Please brief us on your findings." Sarah stepped forward, opened her folder, and began to explain her discovery. She pointed out the unusual frequency patterns, the coded references to Fort Henderson, and the timing sequences that suggested coordinated intelligence gathering. As she spoke, she could see the expressions of the assembled officers growing increasingly grave. General Stevens asked several technical questions about the communications intercepts, testing Sarah's understanding of what she had discovered. His questions revealed a deep knowledge of intelligence operations and confirmed that the situation was as serious as Sarah had suspected. The briefing continued for nearly an hour, with Sarah providing detailed explanations of her analysis and answering questions from the assembled officers. She could sense that her discovery had provided a crucial piece of a larger puzzle that the military leadership was working to solve. After the intense briefing, Sarah was instructed to return to her workstation and continue monitoring communications while maintaining absolute secrecy about what had been discussed. The weight of responsibility felt heavy on her shoulders as she walked back through the corridors of Building C. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Sarah worked diligently, scanning through new intercepts and looking for any additional patterns that might be related to her earlier discovery. The base around her seemed to hum with an undercurrent of tension, though most personnel appeared unaware of the developing situation. Around 1600 hours, Sarah received an encrypted message on her secure terminal. It was from Colonel Williams, who had finally emerged from his emergency meetings. The message was brief but alarming. "Continue analysis. Situation developing. Maintain operational security. Report anything unusual immediately." Sarah understood the gravity of the situation from the formal tone of the message. Colonel Williams was usually more personable in his communications, but the current circumstances demanded strict military protocol. She redoubled her efforts, diving deeper into the intercepted communications with renewed focus. As evening approached, Sarah made another disturbing discovery. The communications she was monitoring showed signs of real-time coordination with someone who had intimate knowledge of Fort Henderson's daily operations. The intelligence being gathered was too specific and too current to be the result of external surveillance alone. The realization that there might be a security breach from within the base sent a chill through Sarah. She had worked alongside these people for 3 years, sharing meals in the cafeteria, attending base social events, and building what she thought were genuine friendships. The possibility that someone she knew and trusted could be betraying their country was almost incomprehensible. Sarah immediately documented her new findings and sent an urgent message to Colonel Williams. Within minutes, she received instructions to compile everything and prepare for another briefing with the generals. The urgency of the response confirmed her fears about the seriousness of the situation. As Sarah gathered her materials, she became aware of subtle changes in the base's routine. Security checkpoints were being reinforced, and she noticed that certain areas were being quietly restricted. The base was preparing for something, though most personnel remained unaware of the developing crisis. The second briefing took place in the same conference room, but this time, the atmosphere was even more tense. General Morrison and General Stevens were joined by additional officers, including representatives from military intelligence and base security. The presence of so many high-ranking officials underscored the national security implications of Sarah's discoveries. "Ms. Martinez," General Stevens began, his voice grave, Your latest analysis confirms our worst fears. We believe we're dealing with an active security breach that threatens not only this base but potentially national security interests. Sarah listened as the generals outlined what they had learned from multiple sources. Her communications analysis was just one piece of a complex investigation that had been developing over several weeks. Other indicators pointed to the same conclusion. Someone with authorized access to Fort Henderson was systematically gathering and transmitting classified information. The investigation had reached a critical point. The generals explained that they had identified several potential suspects, but they needed more evidence to determine who was responsible for the breach. Sarah's continued monitoring would be crucial in gathering the intelligence needed to expose the traitor. "We're implementing enhanced security measures effective immediately," General Morrison announced. "The base will operate under modified protocols until this threat is neutralized. Ms. Martinez, your role in this operation is vital, but it also puts you at potential risk." The mention of personal risk made Sarah's stomach tighten. She had always known that intelligence work carried inherent dangers, but the abstract concept suddenly became very real. She was no longer just analyzing communications from distant threats. She was directly involved in uncovering a conspiracy that could have deadly consequences. Despite her fears, Sarah committed to continuing her work. Her sense of duty and patriotism outweighed her personal concerns. She understood that her unique skills and position made her irreplaceable in the investigation. The generals briefed Sarah on additional security procedures she would need to follow. Her movements on base would be monitored for her protection, and she was given special communication protocols to use if she discovered anything urgent. The level of precaution being taken highlighted the serious nature of the threat they were facing. As the briefing concluded, Sarah was escorted back to her quarters by military security personnel. The usually familiar corridors of the base now felt different, charged with an atmosphere of suspicion and danger. She found herself looking at her colleagues differently, wondering if any of them could be the traitor they were seeking. That night, Sarah had difficulty sleeping. Her mind raced through the events of the day and the implications of what she had discovered. The comfortable routine of her life at Fort Henderson had been shattered, replaced by an urgent and dangerous mission that could determine the fate of national security operations. The following morning, Sarah arrived at work earlier than usual, determined to intensify her analysis efforts. The sooner they could identify the security breach, the sooner the base could return to normal operations. However, she quickly realized that normal might be a thing of the past. Colonel Williams briefed Sarah on overnight developments. The investigation had expanded to include counterintelligence specialists from Washington, and additional resources were being deployed to support the operation. The scope of the suspected breach was larger than initially thought, potentially affecting multiple military installations. Sarah spent the morning developing new analytical techniques to track the suspicious communications patterns. She created sophisticated algorithms to identify subtle correlations that might reveal the identity of the traitor. Her work was painstaking and required intense concentration, but she knew that every detail could be crucial. Around midday, Sarah's analysis revealed something that made her blood run cold. The pattern of information being transmitted corresponded almost exactly with her own work schedule and the timing of classified briefings she had attended. Someone was not only monitoring the base's activities but was specifically tracking her involvement in the investigation. The realization that she was being watched sent waves of fear through Sarah. The traitor knew about her role in uncovering the security breach, which meant she had become a target. Her hands trembled as she documented this latest discovery. Understanding that her situation had become significantly more dangerous, Sarah immediately contacted Colonel Williams, using the emergency communication protocol she had been given. Within minutes, her workstation was surrounded by military security personnel, and she was escorted to a secure location for immediate briefing with the investigating team. The news that Sarah was being specifically monitored changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. The generals realized that the traitor was not only gathering intelligence, but was also actively countering their investigation efforts. The situation had evolved from a security breach to an active espionage operation with immediate threats to personnel safety. The security briefing that followed Sarah's discovery was unlike anything she had experienced. General Morrison and General Stevens were joined by a team of counterintelligence specialists who had arrived overnight from Washington. The conference room buzzed with urgent activity as maps, photographs, and surveillance reports covered every available surface. "Ms. Martinez," General Stevens began, his expression more serious than Sarah had ever seen it, "we need to discuss your safety. The fact that you're being specifically monitored means the traitor sees you as a direct threat. We're implementing immediate protective measures." Sarah listened as the specialists outlined a comprehensive security plan. Her movements would be strictly controlled, her communications monitored, and she would be assigned a protective detail. The base was essentially becoming her fortress, but also her prison. Despite the restrictions, Sarah's analytical work continued with even greater intensity. The counterintelligence team had brought sophisticated equipment that enhanced her ability to track and decode the suspicious communications. Working together, they began to narrow down the list of potential suspects. The investigation revealed that the security breach was more sophisticated than initially suspected. The traitor was using advanced encryption techniques and had established multiple communication channels to avoid detection. This level of expertise suggested someone with extensive training in intelligence operations. As Sarah worked with the specialists, she learned more about the scope of the espionage operation. Information stolen from Fort Henderson was being used to compromise military operations in multiple theaters. American lives were at risk because of the betrayal happening within their own ranks. The emotional weight of this knowledge pressed heavily on Sarah. She had always understood the importance of her work, but now she could see the direct consequences of the security breach. Soldiers in the field were vulnerable because someone at the base was selling their secrets to hostile forces. 3 days into the intensified investigation, Sarah made a breakthrough that changed everything. While analyzing a particularly complex communication sequence, she noticed a subtle timing pattern that matched the work schedule of someone she knew well. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The pattern pointed to Lieutenant Thompson, the same officer who had first brought her discovery to the attention of the generals. The irony was devastating. The person who had helped expose the security breach was himself the traitor they were seeking. Sarah stared at her analysis results, hoping she had made an error. She rechecked her calculations multiple times, but the evidence was unmistakable. Lieutenant Thompson had access to all the information being transmitted. His schedule aligned perfectly with the communication patterns, and he had been in a position to monitor her investigation from the beginning. The discovery that Lieutenant Thompson was the suspected traitor created a complex problem for the investigation team. They needed to gather additional evidence without alerting him to their suspicions. Sarah's analysis provided strong circumstantial evidence, but they needed proof that would stand up in a military court. General Morrison made the difficult decision to continue the investigation covertly while maintaining normal operations. Lieutenant Thompson would remain unaware of their suspicions, while the team gathered the evidence needed to build an airtight case against him. Sarah found herself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. She was required to continue working normally with Lieutenant Thompson, while knowing he was likely a traitor. Every interaction became an exercise in deception as she struggled to maintain her usual professional demeanor. The psychological strain of the situation began to affect Sarah's daily life. She found it difficult to eat, sleep became elusive, and she constantly looked over her shoulder. The knowledge that someone she had trusted was betraying their country made her question her judgment about everyone around her. Lieutenant Thompson, meanwhile, seemed to sense that something had changed. He made more frequent visits to Sarah's workstation, asking detailed questions about her ongoing analysis. His behavior became increasingly suspicious as he pressed for information about the investigation's progress. The counterintelligence team established surveillance on Lieutenant Thompson's activities both on and off base. They monitored his communications, tracked his movements, and began building a comprehensive picture of his espionage operation. What they discovered was more extensive than anyone had imagined. Lieutenant Thompson had been selling information to foreign agents for over 2 years. His betrayal went far beyond the current crisis, encompassing multiple compromised operations and potentially dozens of endangered American personnel. The scope of his treachery was staggering. As the investigation progressed, Sarah was briefed on additional security concerns. Intelligence suggested that Lieutenant Thompson's handlers were aware of the ongoing investigation and were pressuring him to accelerate his information gathering. This created a dangerous escalation that could lead to desperate actions. The team decided to set a trap. They would provide Lieutenant Thompson with false information designed to expose his communication methods and confirm his guilt. Sarah would play a crucial role in this operation by creating believable but fabricated intelligence that could be traced when it was transmitted. Preparing the false intelligence required careful planning. The information had to be convincing enough to fool Lieutenant Thompson and his handlers, while being harmless enough to avoid compromising actual operations. Sarah worked with the counterintelligence specialists to craft documents that would serve their purpose. The trap was set on a Friday afternoon. Sarah provided Lieutenant Thompson with what appeared to be highly classified information about upcoming military exercises. The documents contained subtle markers that would allow the team to track their transmission and identify Lieutenant Thompson's communication methods. Unknown to Sarah, Lieutenant Thompson was becoming increasingly paranoid about the investigation. He had noticed the subtle changes in base security and the increased presence of unfamiliar personnel. His handlers had warned him that his operation might be compromised and instructed him to prepare for emergency extraction. That evening, Lieutenant Thompson made his decision. Rather than transmit the false intelligence immediately, he would gather as much additional information as possible before disappearing. His plan required eliminating the one person who posed the greatest threat to his escape, Sarah Martinez. Lieutenant Thompson spent the weekend studying Sarah's routines and identifying opportunities to act against her. He knew the base layout intimately and had access to areas that would provide cover for his planned operation. His military training had taught him how to move undetected and strike effectively. On Monday morning, Lieutenant Thompson put his plan into action. He would create a situation that would appear to be an accident, while actually being a calculated attempt to silence the analyst who had discovered his betrayal. The irony that he was targeting the person who had initially helped expose the security breach was not lost on him. As Sarah arrived at work that Monday morning, she had no idea that her life was in immediate danger. The investigation was progressing well, and she believed they were close to gathering enough evidence to arrest Lieutenant Thompson. She could not have imagined that he was already aware of their suspicions and was preparing to take desperate action to protect himself. Monday morning began with an unusual sense of normalcy that Sarah found almost comforting. The intensive investigation had consumed her thoughts for days, and she welcomed the brief respite of routine activities. She arrived at Building C at her usual time, greeted the security guards, and made her way to the communications center. Sarah's protective detail maintained their discreet distance, providing security without interfering with her work. She had grown accustomed to their presence, though it served as a constant reminder of the danger surrounding the investigation. Today, however, something felt different about their positioning, though she couldn't quite identify what had changed. Lieutenant Thompson arrived at the communications center shortly after Sarah, his demeanor appearing normal to casual observers. However, Sarah noticed subtle signs of tension in his behavior. His usual easy smile seemed forced, and his eyes darted around the room more frequently than usual. She attributed these observations to her heightened awareness due to the investigation. The morning progressed with typical intelligence analysis activities. Sarah continued her work on the fabricated documents they had prepared for Lieutenant Thompson, carefully maintaining the illusion that the information was genuine. She had become skilled at deception over the past few days, a talent she never thought she would need to develop. Around 10:30 hours, Lieutenant Thompson approached Sarah's workstation with what appeared to be a routine request. He needed her to review some communications intercepts in a secure storage room located in the building's lower level. The request seemed legitimate, as such reviews were common in their line of work. Sarah gathered the necessary materials and followed Lieutenant Thompson through the familiar corridors of Building C. They passed several colleagues and security checkpoints without incident. The lower-level storage area was a section of the building Sarah had visited many times, though always with proper authorization and usually accompanied by multiple personnel. The storage room was located at the end of a long corridor that connected to a stairwell leading to upper floors. The area was well lit and equipped with standard security features, including surveillance cameras and electronic access controls. Sarah felt comfortable following Lieutenant Thompson to this familiar location. As they walked, Lieutenant Thompson engaged Sarah in casual conversation about the ongoing investigation. His questions seemed innocuous, but Sarah recognized them as attempts to gather information about the team's progress. She provided carefully crafted responses that revealed nothing while maintaining their working relationship. Upon reaching the storage room, Lieutenant Thompson used his access card to open the security door. The room contained rows of filing cabinets and computer terminals used for accessing classified archives. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting the windowless space in stark white illumination. Sarah entered the room ahead of Lieutenant Thompson, expecting him to follow with the materials they needed to review. Instead, she heard the sound of the door closing and the electronic lock engaging. When she turned around, she saw Lieutenant Thompson standing by the door with an expression she had never seen before. Cold, calculating, and dangerous. "I know what you've discovered," Lieutenant Thompson said quietly, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth. "I know about the investigation, the surveillance, and the trap you've set for me." "Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" Sarah's heart raced as the reality of her situation became clear. She was alone in a secure room with a trained intelligence officer who had just revealed himself as the traitor they had been hunting. Her protective detail was elsewhere in the building, unaware of the immediate danger she faced. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah replied, attempting to maintain her cover despite the fear flooding through her system. "We're here to review communications intercepts, aren't we?" Lieutenant Thompson's laugh was devoid of humor. "Stop pretending, Sarah. I've been monitoring the investigation since the beginning. I know about your analysis, the counterintelligence team, and the false information you've been preparing. You've become a significant problem that needs to be solved." Sarah realized that Lieutenant Thompson's access to classified information had allowed him to stay ahead of the investigation. He had been using his position to monitor their progress while appearing to assist with their efforts. The sophisticated nature of his espionage operation became even more apparent. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady while scanning the room for potential escape routes or defensive options. The storage room had only one exit, and Lieutenant Thompson was blocking access to it. "I want you to understand that this isn't personal," Lieutenant Thompson replied. "You're intelligent and dedicated, qualities I actually respect. Unfortunately, your skills have made you a threat to an operation that's much larger than you realize." Lieutenant Thompson began to explain the scope of his espionage activities, revealing details that shocked Sarah with their breadth and audacity. He had been selling military secrets for years, compromising operations across multiple theaters and putting countless American lives at risk. The money and ideological motivations behind his betrayal painted a picture of systematic treachery. As Lieutenant Thompson spoke, Sarah noticed that he was positioning himself closer to her, while maintaining control of the room's exit. His military training was evident in how he managed the confined space, keeping her contained while preparing for whatever action he planned to take. "The investigation ends here," Lieutenant Thompson declared, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You're going to have an unfortunate accident that will eliminate the primary threat to my operation. The false intelligence you prepared will disappear, and the investigation will lose its key analyst." Sarah's mind raced as she calculated her options. Lieutenant Thompson was larger and stronger, with military combat training that far exceeded her own capabilities. However, her knowledge of the building's layout and security systems might provide opportunities if she could create enough distraction to escape. "They'll know it wasn't an accident," Sarah said, trying to buy time while looking for any advantage. "The counterintelligence team is tracking everything. They'll investigate every detail of what happens to me." "Accidents happen in military facilities," Lieutenant Thompson replied coldly. "Falls downstairs, equipment malfunctions, security breaches, all unfortunate but explainable events. Your death will be tragic but not suspicious enough to compromise my extraction plans." The mention of stairs sent a chill through Sarah as she realized Lieutenant Thompson's plan. The stairwell outside the storage room provided the perfect setting for what would appear to be an accidental fall. The concrete steps and metal railings would ensure that any fall would be fatal, while the isolated location would give him time to stage the scene. Lieutenant Thompson moved closer to Sarah, his intentions becoming unmistakably clear. She backed against the filing cabinets, realizing that her time for planning was running out. Whatever action she was going to take had to happen immediately, before he could implement his deadly plan. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said desperately. "We can work something out. I won't reveal what I know if you just walk away now." "It's too late for negotiations," Lieutenant Thompson replied, reaching for her arm. "You've seen too much and learned too much. The only way to protect my operation is to eliminate the threat you represent." Sarah knew that her survival depended on the next few seconds. Lieutenant Thompson's plan to make her death appear accidental meant he needed to get her to the stairwell. If she could resist or escape during the transition from the storage room, she might have a chance to reach help before he could complete his deadly scheme. Sarah's survival instincts kicked in as Lieutenant Thompson reached for her. She ducked under his outstretched arm and grabbed a heavy 3-ring binder from the filing cabinet, swinging it at his head with all her strength. The impact caught him off guard, causing him to stumble backward and momentarily lose his grip on the situation. Taking advantage of the brief opening, Sarah lunged toward the door and frantically worked to override the electronic lock. Her security clearance gave her access to emergency protocols, and she managed to trigger an alarm that would alert base security to a problem in the storage area. Lieutenant Thompson recovered quickly from her attack and grabbed Sarah's shoulder, spinning her around to face him. His expression had changed from cold calculation to desperate anger as he realized his plan was falling apart. The sound of the security alarm echoing through the corridors meant that their confrontation would soon be discovered. "You've just signed your death warrant," Lieutenant Thompson snarled, his military training taking over as he attempted to regain control of the situation. "If I can't make this look like an accident, I'll just have to improvise." Sarah fought against his grip, using techniques she had learned in the base's self-defense classes. While she was no match for his strength and training, her determination and the adrenaline flooding her system gave her surprising resilience. She managed to break free from his grasp and put some distance between them in the confined space. The electronic lock disengaged as the security alarm continued to sound. Sarah could hear footsteps in the corridor outside, indicating that base security personnel were responding to the alert. Lieutenant Thompson heard them too, and his desperation increased as he realized his window of opportunity was closing rapidly. "This isn't over," Lieutenant Thompson warned, moving toward the door as the sound of approaching security grew louder. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into or who you're really dealing with." Before Sarah could respond, the storage room door burst open and 3 armed security personnel entered with weapons drawn. Lieutenant Thompson immediately raised his hands and adopted a confused expression, attempting to portray himself as an innocent victim of the security alert. "Thank goodness you're here," Lieutenant Thompson said, his voice carrying practiced sincerity. "Ms. Martinez accidentally triggered the alarm while we were reviewing classified materials. I was trying to help her reset the system when you arrived." Sarah stared at Lieutenant Thompson in amazement at his ability to instantly switch from threatening her life to playing the role of a helpful colleague. His transformation was so complete that she almost doubted her own memory of what had just occurred. "That's not what happened," Sarah said firmly, addressing the lead security officer. "Lieutenant Thompson brought me here under false pretenses and threatened me. He's the security breach we've been investigating." The security team found themselves in an awkward position. They were facing conflicting accounts from 2 authorized personnel, both of whom had legitimate reasons to be in the secure storage area. Without additional evidence, they had to follow protocol and secure the scene, while requesting guidance from higher authority. "Sir, ma'am, we need both of you to remain calm while we sort this out," the lead security officer said professionally. "We're going to escort you to separate debriefing rooms while our superiors are notified of the situation." Lieutenant Thompson nodded cooperatively, maintaining his facade of innocent confusion. "Of course, officer. I understand you need to follow procedures. I'm sure this misunderstanding will be cleared up quickly once the proper authorities review what happened." Sarah felt a wave of frustration as she realized that Lieutenant Thompson's performance was convincing enough to create doubt about her accusations. Without witnesses or physical evidence of his threats, the situation had become her word against his, with his rank and reputation potentially giving him an advantage. As the security team prepared to escort them from the storage room, Sarah noticed that Lieutenant Thompson was subtly positioning himself near the stairwell they would need to use to exit the lower level. His body language suggested he was preparing for some kind of action, despite the presence of armed guards. "We need to take the elevator," Sarah said quickly to the security team. Lieutenant Thompson was planning to push me down those stairs. That's why he brought me to this location. The lead security officer glanced between Sarah and Lieutenant Thompson, trying to assess the credibility of her claim. Lieutenant Thompson's expression remained one of confused concern, but Sarah caught a brief flash of anger in his eyes before he regained control. "Officer, I'm afraid Ms. Martinez may be suffering from stress-related paranoia," Lieutenant Thompson said with apparent sympathy. "She's been working under intense pressure lately, and I think the investigation may be affecting her judgment." The psychological warfare of Lieutenant Thompson's response was sophisticated and dangerous. By suggesting that Sarah was mentally unstable, he was attempting to undermine her credibility while positioning himself as a concerned colleague trying to help someone in distress. "I am not paranoid," Sarah stated firmly. "I have documented evidence that Lieutenant Thompson is the traitor we've been investigating. General Morrison and General Stevens need to be notified immediately." The mention of the two generals got the security team's attention. They were aware that some kind of high-level investigation was ongoing, though they had not been briefed on the specific details. The potential involvement of general officers elevated the seriousness of the situation. "We're going to contact command immediately," the lead security officer decided. "Both of you will be placed in protective custody until this matter can be resolved by the appropriate authorities." Lieutenant Thompson's calm facade began to crack slightly as he realized that his options were becoming limited. Sarah could see him calculating possibilities, and she sensed that his desperation might lead him to take dangerous action, even with armed guards present. The security team began moving toward the elevator, with Sarah and Lieutenant Thompson separated by two guards. As they walked through the corridor, Sarah remained hyper-vigilant, watching for any sign that Lieutenant Thompson might attempt to escape or harm someone. Unknown to the security team, Lieutenant Thompson had been trained in techniques for escaping custody and neutralizing guards. His espionage handlers had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, teaching him how to create chaos and disappear in the confusion. As they reached the elevator, Lieutenant Thompson made his move. He suddenly stumbled forward, appearing to lose his balance, but the movement was calculated to bring him within striking distance of the nearest guard. In one fluid motion, he disarmed the guard and created a human shield while backing toward the stairwell. "Nobody move," Lieutenant Thompson commanded, his voice now carrying the hard edge of a desperate man with nothing left to lose. "I'm walking out of here, and anyone who tries to stop me will get this guard hurt." The situation had escalated from a security alert to a hostage crisis in a matter of seconds. Sarah watched in horror as Lieutenant Thompson's true nature was finally revealed to the security team. His mask of respectability had been completely stripped away, replaced by the cold professionalism of a trained operative. The lead security officer immediately called for backup while attempting to negotiate with Lieutenant Thompson. The confined space of the corridor made any aggressive action extremely dangerous, as the hostage could be harmed before Thompson could be neutralized. "Let the guard go, Lieutenant," the security officer said calmly. "You're only making the situation worse for yourself." "We can work this out if you cooperate." Lieutenant Thompson laughed bitterly. "There's no working this out. You have no idea what you're dealing with or who's really in control here. This base has been compromised for years, and I'm just one small part of a much larger operation." The revelation that the espionage network was more extensive than they had realized sent shockwaves through the security team. Sarah felt sick as she understood that Lieutenant Thompson's betrayal was part of a systematic infiltration that could involve multiple personnel at Fort Henderson. Lieutenant Thompson's hostage situation created chaos throughout Building C as alarms sounded and security protocols activated automatically. The base's emergency response system locked down all exits and initiated communication with command headquarters. Within minutes, the corridor was surrounded by additional security personnel, but their options remained limited due to the hostage. Sarah found herself in the terrifying position of watching a desperate traitor hold an innocent guard at gunpoint, while revealing the existence of a larger espionage network. The implications of his statements about multiple compromised personnel sent waves of shock through everyone present. "Sarah knows too much about our operation," Lieutenant Thompson continued, his voice echoing in the tense corridor. "Her analysis capabilities made her dangerous from the beginning, but she's not the only threat we've identified. General Morrison's voice suddenly crackled through the building's communication system. "This is base command. Lieutenant Thompson, you are surrounded and have no escape options. Release the hostage immediately and surrender yourself for debriefing." Lieutenant Thompson's response was to press his weapon more firmly against the guard's head. "General Morrison, you should know that your base has been under surveillance for over 3 years. Every security measure, every protocol, every secret you think you're protecting, it's all been compromised." The psychological impact of Lieutenant Thompson's revelations was devastating. Sarah could see the doubt and fear in the eyes of the security personnel as they realized that their most basic assumptions about base security had been shattered. "Tell me about the network," Sarah called out, hoping to keep Lieutenant Thompson talking while backup plans were developed. "How many others are involved?" Lieutenant Thompson's laugh was cold and bitter. "More than you could imagine, Sarah. We have people in communications, security, intelligence, even command positions. Your little investigation barely scratched the surface of what's really happening here." General Stevens's voice joined the communication from the command center. "Lieutenant, your handlers have abandoned you. We intercepted their extraction plans and no one is coming to help you. Your only option is surrender." The news that his escape route had been compromised visibly shook Lieutenant Thompson. For the first time since taking the hostage, his confident demeanor showed cracks. Sarah could see him recalculating his options as the reality of his situation became clear. "You're lying," Lieutenant Thompson said, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "My contacts wouldn't leave me exposed like this." "Check your secure communication device," General Stevens responded. "Your handler sent a termination order 20 minutes ago. You've become expendable to them." Lieutenant Thompson awkwardly reached for his concealed communication device while maintaining his grip on the hostage. What he saw on the screen confirmed his worst fears. A brief message indicating that his operation had been compromised and that he was considered a liability to be eliminated. The betrayal by his own handlers seemed to break something inside Lieutenant Thompson. Sarah watched as his expression shifted from desperate determination to hollow despair. The man who had sold his country's secrets for money and ideology now realized that his new masters considered him disposable. "They used me," Lieutenant Thompson said quietly, his voice barely audible in the tense corridor. 3 years of risk, 3 years of betraying everything I once believed in, and they just throw me away when it becomes inconvenient." Sarah felt a mixture of pity and revulsion as she watched Lieutenant Thompson grapple with the consequences of his choices. His betrayal had put countless lives at risk, but seeing him abandoned by his handlers was a stark reminder of the ultimate futility of treason. General Morrison's voice returned to the communication system. "Lieutenant, this is your final opportunity to surrender peacefully. Release the hostage, drop your weapon, and we can end this without further bloodshed." Lieutenant Thompson stood silently for several long moments, apparently weighing his remaining options. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out on his face as he realized that his situation was hopeless regardless of what choice he made. Suddenly, Lieutenant Thompson made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of continuing to threaten the hostage, he pushed the guard away from him and raised his weapon toward his own head. The desperate act of a man who saw no acceptable alternatives to his predicament. "Stop!" Sarah shouted, instinctively moving toward Lieutenant Thompson despite the danger. "It doesn't have to end this way." The security team immediately moved to secure the released hostage while maintaining their positions around Lieutenant Thompson. The situation had shifted from a hostage crisis to a suicide prevention scenario in a matter of seconds. "There's nothing left," Lieutenant Thompson said, his voice hollow with despair. "I've lost everything. My country, my honor, my future. Even the people I betrayed my oath for have abandoned me." General Morrison's voice took on a more personal tone. "Thompson, you're a decorated officer who made terrible choices, but ending your life won't solve anything or bring back the damage you've caused. You still have information that could help us protect the people you've put at risk." The appeal to Lieutenant Thompson's remaining sense of duty seemed to have some effect. Sarah could see him wavering as he considered the general's words. The possibility of redemption through cooperation offered an alternative to the despair that had been consuming him. "The network is bigger than you know," Lieutenant Thompson said finally, lowering his weapon slightly. "There are cells in multiple installations, coordinated by handlers who have been planning this for years. If I help you, they'll kill me eventually anyway. We can protect you, General Stevens assured him through the communication system. Full cooperation in exchange for protective custody and reduced charges. You can help us save the lives that your information has put at risk. Sarah watched as Lieutenant Thompson struggled with his decision. The man who had threatened her life just minutes earlier was now facing the ultimate choice between continued resistance and potential redemption through cooperation with his former colleagues. After what felt like an eternity, Lieutenant Thompson slowly placed his weapon on the ground and raised his hands in surrender. "I'll tell you everything I know," he said quietly. "But you need to understand that stopping this network will be harder than you imagine." The security team immediately moved in to secure Lieutenant Thompson and the weapon. As they placed him in restraints, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion wash over her. The immediate danger was over, but the larger threat he had revealed was just beginning to be understood. General Morrison and General Stevens arrived at the scene within minutes, accompanied by the counterintelligence specialists who had been working on the investigation. The debriefing that followed would last for hours, as Lieutenant Thompson provided details about the extensive espionage network that had infiltrated Fort Henderson. Sarah's role in uncovering the security breach had saved countless lives and potentially prevented a national security disaster. Her analytical skills and determination had exposed a conspiracy that could have compromised military operations for years to come. As the immediate crisis concluded, Sarah realized that her life at Fort Henderson would never be the same. The investigation that had started with unusual communication patterns had revealed threats that went far beyond anything they had imagined. The base would need months to identify and eliminate all aspects of the espionage network. The incident had changed everyone involved, but it had also demonstrated the importance of vigilance and the courage of individuals willing to stand up against betrayal. Sarah's discovery had prevented a catastrophe and ensured that the sacrifices of American service members would not be in vain due to the treachery of those sworn to protect them.